What's going on, guys? Today we're going to be looking at what might be my favorite deck in Modern, or definitely one of my favorite decks in Modern. We're going to be looking at Restore Balance. Restore Balance is interesting because it's kind of been a fringe deck since Modern existed. It's kind of always been around, but it never saw competitive play until a couple years ago. There was a I guess you could say a tier one ish deck list that started floating around. A couple people were having success in tournaments with it. They added planeswalkers, they added Emrakul. The deck list price shot through the roof. Obviously, it created a bit of buzz. Most of the people on YouTube started making videos about it. MTG Goldfish had a budget version of it. People on Channel Fireball were playing it, stuff like that. So let's look at how the deck works, and then I'll show you what I'm going to be doing with it. So the deck is built around Restore Balance. And Restore Balance is an interesting card. It might seem weird if you didn't play during Time Spiral, because it doesn't have a mana cost. It only has a suspend cost. You can only pay one for it, and it takes 6 turns for it to be cast. And so it's you can't really surprise your opponent, at least not if you play it naturally. The trick here is that we're going to be cheating it into play. So basically, when Restore Balance hits play, each player has to sacrifice lands, creatures, and discard cards equal to the lowest amount in play. So for example, if one person has 5 creatures and another person has 2, the person with 5 creatures has to sacrifice 3. If one person has 6 cards in hand and another one has 4, the person with 6 cards has to discard 2 so that everybody has the same number of lands, creatures, and cards in hand. Hence the term balance. It's supposed to balance the playing field. And then we're basically going to use that and, kind of cheat to ensure that our opponent has to sacrifice everything, discard everything, and we still have all of our stuff. So the first thing we want to look at is how are we going to cast Restore Balance? Obviously, if we have it on suspend, our opponent's going to know what's coming. They won't play their creatures, they won't play their lands, because they know, maybe 2 or 3 turns from now, however many counters are on Restore Balance, that it's going to come into play, and they want to ensure that they keep stuff. So they're not going to overplay their hand if they know it's coming. So we're going to be cheating it into play with cascade spells. Demonic Dread, Ardent Plea, and Violent Outburst. So cascade basically says that whenever you play that spell, you get to reveal cards off the top of your deck until you reveal a card that costs less, and then you can cast that for free. And the trick here is that nothing in our deck is going to cost less than 3. Everything's going to be 3 or more. So when we cast a cascade spell, it's guaranteed to hit Restore Balance every single time. So essentially, we're going to cast Restore Balance for 3 mana. Whether it's, Demonic Dread, Violent Outburst, or Ardent Plea, for 3 mana, we're casting a Restore Balance. So the second question you might have is, well, what's stopping you from having to sacrifice all your lands, right? Well, that's because we're going to be playing Border Post. We got a whole bunch of them here. I'm not going to name them all, but they all do the same thing. The key here is that they are basically lands. You pay 1 mana and return a basic land to put them into play tapped. So basically, say turn 1, you play a land, you tap it, pay 1 for the Border Post, put it into play tapped, and bounce the land to your hand. Next turn, you play that land again, bounce it for another Border Post. So essentially, we're playing Border Posts as lands, but they're not lands, they're artifacts. So when we get to the point where we can cast a Restore Balance, when it resolves, we technically don't have lands in play. We're using Border Posts as lands. So our opponent has to sacrifice all of their lands. If they have 4 or 5 lands and we have 4 or 5 Border Posts, doesn't matter for us. We technically have 0 lands, so they have to sacrifice all their lands. Same with creatures. We're not going to be playing any creatures the first few turns, so they will also have to sacrifice all their creatures. And depending on what type of deck we're playing in our own hand, we might be forcing them to discard a lot of cards as well. So that's how we're cheating with the Restore Balance. That's how we're getting to abuse Restore Balance so that it only hurts our opponent. Even though it's supposed to be creating balance, we're cheating and we're forcing our opponent to just lose everything, and we don't lose anything really. So then, how do we win, right? I mean, that's great. We can completely decimate our opponent's board, but we need a way to win. Well, there's three main win conditions here, traditionally, though we're going to be adding a fourth. But traditionally, first off, you play Greater Gargadon and Nihilith. So the interesting thing about these is, again, their mana costs are high, so they won't get hit by Cascade, but we can still play them for their suspend cost on the first couple turns. Our mana curve isn't as bad as it looks because we do have these suspend creatures. And Greater Gargadon is really useful because you can sacrifice creatures and artifacts and lands to reduce its suspend count. That's critical because if you cascade into a restore balance and you have a couple lands in play, you can sacrifice them to the Gargadon to ensure that your opponent has to sacrifice all their lands. Nihilith is also good. If it's suspended, it has suspend 7, which is a lot. But, if you, again, cascade into a restore balance, your opponent has to sacrifice everything and discard cards, and it'll, remove the vast majority of the counters off Nihilith. A lot of times it'll come straight into play. And, it's going to take a couple turns for your opponent to recover, assuming they can at all. So it's going to account for at least, you would take 8 to 12 damage before your opponent even is capable of responding to it, assuming they can in the first place. And our last win condition is the March of the Machines. This just turns all of our border posts into artifact creatures, 3/3 artifact creatures. And it's pretty devastating after a restore balance. You cast restore balance, you sweep the board, you sweep all their lands. It's gonna take a few turns for them to get back on track. You throw a March of the Machines in play. Presumably you have at least 4 border posts if you're playing it, or at least 3. So you've got 9 to 12 damage per turn. So you can just beat down with animated artifacts, basically. And then a couple other cards that are usually played in the budget version is Lingering Souls and Simian Spirit Guide. So Lingering Souls is just nice to have chump blockers. You can sacrifice them to Greater Gargadon if you cascade into a restore balance. And they can actually win games. If you sweep the board and then play Lingering Souls and its flashback cost, it's not that dissimilar from Annihilith. You've got 4 power. So it's really just a versatility card, and it gives you a lot of reach. It can keep you in a lot of games that you might otherwise have lost without it. And then Simian Spirit Guide just lets you get restore balances out even faster. Border posts do have to come into play tapped, so they let you cascade sooner. And the benefit of Simian Spirit Guide is if you discard it to get that mana and then cascade into a restore balance, you're not really losing a card because then your opponent's going to have to discard an extra card. So Simian Spirit Guide is just to make the deck a little bit more aggressive, get the clock going a little bit faster. And the worst case scenario, you can actually play it and sacrifice it to a Gargadon just to get another time counter off of it. So that was the traditional budget list, or at least that's the core of the deck. Obviously, there are lots of different versions of it, but that's the core of it. That's the basic idea. And it changed in 2015 when a couple people started again adding. They added Emrakul, they added Ajani, Nahiri. It was called Nahiri Restore Balance was the typical name of the deck, and that was the tier 1 version. But I bought the budget version, obviously, and I played it for a little while, and I like the deck. It's pretty fun. My biggest complaint is that I just wouldn't hit my win conditions often enough. I'd be cascading into restore balance multiple times per game, and it was just taking forever. And that's fine in a tournament setting. All that really matters is that you win eventually. But as someone who was just playing in the tournament practice room, the games were just too long, and I wasn't that interested in spending that much time on every single game. Not to mention people would just rage quit because you would sweep the board and then just do nothing for 3 or 4 turns. And it was just not my kind of deck. I really wanted another win condition. I just wanted something that could kill my opponent. Just one more card that could ensure that I could just end the games quickly when I needed to. And so I started searching around, and the card that I finally settled on is kind of out there. It's a new card, so this probably hasn't been play tested by a lot of people, but it's kind of interesting. I kind of threw it in thinking, am I actually going to add this card to restore balance? Am I actually going to add this card to a somewhat competitive deck because it's such a Timmy card, but it's like it actually functions perfectly in this deck. I'm adding Metalwork Colossus. I know, it seems weird, but it works perfectly. You have to realize that border posts reduce the cost of the Colossus. So you are guaranteed to get it out on turn 3 no matter what. Turn 3 you play a border post tap, so it now costs 9, and then you can tap your other two to play it. And what I really like about it is that it fixes the biggest issue I had with this deck. Time and time again, I would cast a Restore Balance, and then I wouldn't have a creature to kill my opponent with for a turn or two. Greater Gargadon might not come out for a couple turns. I might not have an Nihilith. I might not have a March of the Machines. Metalwork Colossus, if you play it after turn 4, is free. So you can cascade into a Restore Balance, sweep the board, and then just lay a Metalwork Colossus in play for free. So you're guaranteed to start swinging for 10 next turn. And not many people can stop that. The only way someone can stop that, really, is if they're playing white and they have a Plains and a Path to Exile. More often than not, if you restore balance and then throw your Colossus in for free, it will win you the game. You don't have to rely on Greater Gargadon. You don't have to sacrifice your entire board to Gargadon to get it to come into play. Metalwork Colossus is free. It just comes into play. You don't have to pay anything, and then you can start swinging with it next turn. It's exactly what I wanted out of this. It was the biggest flaw in the deck for me personally, not as a competitive player, but as someone just playing in tournament practice. It was the one thing that really made me not like the deck, was that after sweeping the board, I just couldn't play something to win the game with. And Metalwork Colossus fixes that. And then there are games where you just don't get into a restore balance, and it's fine because you get a turn 3 Metalwork Colossus, and you could just potentially just beat down with it. That doesn't happen often, but it has happened a few times, and it's been pretty funny. So anyway, super quick, now that you know how everything works, I'll go over my personal deck list. So I'm running 4 Restore Balance, 4 Metalwork Colossus, 4 Greater Gargadon, 2 Nihilith, and 3 March of the Machines. So that's our main, sweep the board and end the game package. And then next up is our Cascade package. I'm playing 4 Ardent Plea, 4 Violent Outburst, and 2 Demonic Dread. And the reason I'm only playing 2 Demonic Dread is because you do need a creature to target. But I do have 2 more in the sideboard, so you can bring those in if your opponent is playing creatures. And then we have our border post. I have 4 Mist Vein, 4 Vein Fire, 4 Firewind, and 2 Wild Field. And you can play around with these ratios too, but I think they're fine. And then our lands, you need 5 Evolving Wilds and Terramorphic Expanse type of lands. I'm running like 3 Evolving Wilds and 2 Terramorphic Expanses, but any combination is fine. And then I'm running 1 Swamp, 1 Plains, 1 Forest, 1 Island, and 2 Mountains. Just because more often than not I want a mountain. 2 of our Cascade spells need mountains. Greater Gargadon needs a mountain to suspend, so I just like having the extra mountain. And then in the sideboard I'm running 3 Oblivion Ring, 4 Wismare, and 4 Ingot Chewers. I'm using these over more traditional artifact and enchantment hate because you can evoke them into play and then you can immediately sacrifice them to a Gargadon. So you get to destroy an artifact or enchantment and you get to take a counter off Gargadon. I'm also playing an extra Nihilith in the sideboard. I just like it for decks that play a lot of creatures and lands. Have a higher tendency to get an Nihilith into play faster. I'm also playing a Pulsa Marasa, just a way to gain life. And realistically, Nihilith and Pulsa Marasa should probably be replaced by some kind of graveyard hate. 2 Nihilith spell bombs would be nice. I have them, I just don't have them in. But this is what I'm doing. This is what I've been playing with, and it's been working fine. And then I'm going to be playing the 2 Demonic Dreads as mentioned before. So that's the entire deck list. It is a little bit more expensive than the types of decks that I would normally feature on this channel. I like to keep it at like a 4 to 5 ticket or less limit, but this is closer to 10. But it's super competitive. You can play this in tournament practice and win very consistently. I like this deck so much. I haven't played in paper in a long time, but if I was playing at FNMs, this would definitely be the deck that I'd build. I think in paper and US dollars, it's like, I don't know, 40 or $50. And this would be my deck for sure. I love this deck. So for the price, something that you can potentially take to F&Ms and win fairly consistently. Something that you can definitely take into competitive leagues online, and maybe not be the best deck, but definitely have a deck that could potentially win. You don't just feel like you have no chance at all. With most of my budget decks, I kind of go into them knowing that if I get matched up against tier one, it's gonna be rough. It's something that I can do. I'm fine with playing tier one, and I can take them down from time to time. But realistically, I always know that like the 2 to 3 ticket decks that I build aren't gonna be super competitive with tier one decks. This thing can take down tier one decks like nothing. I'm not saying it's the number one best deck in history, but it is a very affordable deck for someone who wants to kind of push themselves into the competitive scene without spending, $1,000 or several hundred tickets. If you want to spend 10 tickets or $40 to $50 and have a chance, this is potentially the deck for you. It's definitely the deck for me. I love this thing. And anyway, I'm going to be playing 5 games with it in tournament practice. And if you want to see those games, as always, check the description. There should be a playlist. And I will see you in the first match.